Hey everyone, and welcome to another tutorial by artincontext.org, where we explore various art-related topics. My name is Matt, and in today's tutorial we'll be breaking down the process of how to draw a nose. Now, there's many ways to draw different noses, of course, and obviously noses and features in general are very much contextualized by their ethnicity. However, there's many noses to choose from. That being said, the process is kind of similar for all noses in terms of establishing it with a basic grid structure. And in this particular tutorial, we'll be drawing a feminine Caucasian styled nose, and this is going to give us the opportunity to kind of work with a more protruding ridge that flows into the brow or the eye sockets. This will also give us an opportunity to have a more subtle protrusion near the tip of the nose that kind of curves downward into the fulcrum that connects to the upper lip. Again, the process of drawing noses are applicable to all types of noses. That being said, it is nice to know that different nose types and structures do work well with certain ethnic or racial profiles. And that's something to keep in mind when we want to be a bit more accurate of our representation of a diverse group of characters. Now, in this tutorial, we won't necessarily be drawing our nose directly straight forward from the front view. We will kind of be drawing the nose from a slightly slanted side view, and this is going to give a little bit more of a nuance and more interesting way of approaching the drawing process. So the way in which we can start is we want to take a light pencil, we want to establish this grid with a vertical line and then a horizontal line that kind of goes through that vertical line perpendicularly near the bottom of the vertical line, and basically it's almost like an upside down cross shape. What this is going to do is that horizontal line is going to establish the placement of the nostrils and where the starting point of the nose or the tip of the nose begins, or where it connects to the fulcrum. Now, what we can do is we can begin with drawing this really light outline of the nose. And again, because we're drawing the nose from an angle, we want to make sure that the left nostril or the nostril to our right side is slightly larger. The area that connects to the fulcrum, the tip of the nose, is going to kind of curve upwards and then have a subtle curve inward on itself to establish the right nostril, which will be on the left side of us. Again, because the nose is at an angle, the left nostril is going to be slightly less visible, whereas the right nostril is going to be a little bit more visible. We'll be able to see more inside of that nostril. Now, the thing is, the nose is quite a very complex structure in the sense that it has this protrusion, but between the tip of the nose, the columnella, which is the bottom section that connects to the fulcrum above the upper lips, the nostril, the alae, which are the skin overlaps around the nostrils, and then the dorsum, or the ridge of the nose that moves up towards the eye. They all have these protrusions because basically a nose is a bone structure with skin that rests over this bone structure. Now, with a nose drawing, the way in which we're going to represent these kind of features to kind of create distinctions isn't necessarily with distinct line work, but with more subtle shading work. And this is where the nose becomes more a challenge or an exercise of shading, because what we want to do is we want to really play around with gradients. The reason being is because these features don't necessarily have really sharp or harsh bone structures that create distinct differences in shadow formation along the nose structure, but rather because the skin overlaps in very subtle bends over the bone structure, the shadowing around the nose shifts very softly or very seamlessly between these features. So with the ridge of the nose or the dorsum that moves to the tip, this area is the most exposed, and this tends to be the lightest area, which means the surrounding features such as the alae, which are those skin overlaps around the nostrils, as well as the nostrils themselves, because they are a indentation, which means light struggles to penetrate that area, as well as the columnella, because it faces downward. These areas tend to be slightly darker. So what we want to do is we want to work with our pencils and slowly add a layer of shading, establishing how shadow forms along these areas. Now, the idea here is to really pay attention to how the shadow formation shift from dark to light. With the alaes, we really want to make sure that we are creating this darkened shading around the creases where the alae kind of connects to the cheek area of the face, and these creases obviously tend to be dark because light struggles to penetrate around these creases near the nose. With the columnella, obviously the shadowing is going to be a little bit more stark or a little bit more darker, to that, or in comparison to that of the dorsum or the tip of the nose. Again, those areas are more exposed to light, so they tend to be more light. And the nostrils obviously will become more darker as they are the main orifice or main indentation feature in the nose, which means they will have the least amount of light. So we just want to take our time. We can also start to kind of draw in or sketch in the ridge of the nose or the dorsum that flows in towards the eye sockets to just contextualize the nose a little more. We can also do the same for the lower section of the nose and how the columella kind of flows into the philtrum that rests above the upper lip of the nose. And we can also start to add in some shading to the philtrum. We really want to just make sure that we are establishing some light pencil work for now, basically working with our erasers and our pencils to form the nose in a basic light pencil sketch, which is going to later on be the demarcating shaded features or shaded areas in which we will go over with pen work, which is going to give the drawing a little bit more contrast. We'll use those pencil marks to kind of create a darker layer with our pen, which again will kind of help us or guide us as we make these more darker and more contrasted shading marks to give a bit more three-dimensionality and a more realistic quality to our nose drawing. Now, once we have taken our time with our pencils, again, do not rush that process. You really want to make sure that you spend time establishing this layer or this sketch of the nose with pencil. You want to make sure that before you move on to working with pen, you have an actual nose drawn in pencil. Another good suggestion is to actually look at a few noses and look at how they are represented in a drawing format. Some important things to note before we move on to pen is that the nose is very subtle in its shifts of shadow formation between these different features, and this is the case for all noses. So this process is quite applicable to all types of noses. Learn how to draw one nose might be unique in terms of how it suits a particular racial ethnic profile. However, the process of forming a nose, the fundamental concepts of shadow formation and how it functions with bone structure tends to be quite the same. So keep that in mind as you establish the nose with your pencil sketch, and take your time. Now, when we work with ballpoint pen, or when we work with a darker medium similar to ballpoint pen, the process is the same as pencil. And basically, especially with ballpoint pen, ink tends to come out quite sparingly, which means it works very similar to the way graphite pencils work. So it's all a matter of how we apply pressure to our pen in terms of how we create moments of shadow in the nose. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work from the bottom of the nose and move up through to the dorsum of the nose and how it connects into the eye sockets. This is because the features near the bottom of the nose are a little bit more complicated. That being said, it's a part of the nose that we want to spend the most time on. Now, starting with the philtrum, again, the philtrum is an indentation that falls just under the columella of the nose, which means that it does have a moment where it will have some sort of highlight in it. So we don't want to completely darken out the philtrum. We also want to add shading around the philtrum. What we can also do is, because of how the columella kind of folds in on itself, is it creates this little dark line around it, and this is because there is shadowing that forms under the columella. Now what we also want to do is with the nostrils, we want to kind of make sure that we are darkening the nostrils. However, there is a moment where the nostrils become lighter as the skin becomes more exposed to a light source from the inside of the nostril towards the skin that is visible just outside of the nostril. And these are these little details we really want to spend time on. Again, it's all about making these subtle little shadow gradients in all these features and spending time on it. So whenever there is like an orifice or some sort of very prominent indentation like a nostril where light will struggle to penetrate, we'll see that the shadowing becomes a little bit more softer and lighter as that area becomes more exposed to the light source. What we can also do is we can start to add in more defined line work around the nostril or the alae, or the skin that goes over the nostril. We can do this around the outer sides of the alae as well, and this is because that skin folds in on itself and creates a crease that rests against the skin of the cheek. So this will create an actual dark lining. Now, with the shadowing that forms on the top part of the alae, that kind of establishes the outer section of the nostrils, the side feature of the nostrils. This shadow formation is a bit more subtle. So obviously as it curves downward, it will be slightly darker, but as it starts to flow up towards the dorsum, or the tip of the nose and the dorsum, and how the shadow forms around the ridge, around the dorsum, we'll see that the shadowing becomes lighter and lighter. Again, because we're drawing the nose from an angle, we really want to pay attention to how the light source is hitting these features. Now this means as we add in these shading gradients, we want to consider darkening the right side a little bit, and this is because the nose is at an angle, which means the shadows are going to be a little bit more darker towards the right nostril, the nostril that's on our left side, and that is because the nose is tilted at an angle and therefore the light is struggling to penetrate or hit those features, and that means what's going to happen is the shadowing around the right nostril is going to be a little bit more darker and distinct as it moves around the tip of the nose along the dorsum or the ridge of the nose. And we also want to make sure that as we shade in these features, or as we add shadowing that moves from the columella to the right nostril around the tip of the nose, this shading is going to form this circular shape, or this arching shape that defines the tip of the nose. The tip of the nose is basically only defined by shadowing around it, and this is also something we want to bear in mind. So the shadowing around the tip of the nose, or the shadowing presence in the alaes or in the columella, is slowly defining the protrusion that is the tip of the nose because of how lit up it is, or how well exposed to light it is. Using your pen, what we can also start doing is defining the dorsum or the tip of the nose around the outer sides of the alaes, specifically on the right nostril. Again, the right nostril is present on the left, and this is where we can actually add in some distinct dark line work or pen shading to bring out the nose a little bit more, or create a distinction in depth between the cheek, or the skin that rests along the cheek, and the actual nose structure itself. So we can add shading kind of behind the right nostril, or the right area of the dorsum. Again, this is present on the left side of the nose, and this is going to bring the nose out a little bit more. Now again, pen shading is a matter of patience. We really want to pay attention to the pressure applied to the pen. We want to approach it as if we were using a pencil, and this is where we slowly build up layers of shading. We keep our pen work light, and we build up layers as opposed to kind of just create these dark lines. It's better to build up layers because this way we are less likely to make a mistake. Now we can start adding some lighter shading that flows along the dorsum into the eye sockets, and this is where the shading or the shadowing becomes a little bit more soft because of how the skin doesn't necessarily have really sharp turns around the cartilaginous or bone structure, because the protrusion is a lot less harsh in the dorsum of the nose than it is in the lower dorsum section, or the tip of the nose. The lower section, we're dealing with creases in the skin, we're dealing with the little orifices of the nostrils, we're dealing with the angle of the nose, and this is where our shading is a little bit more darker. But as the shading or the shadowing formations move through the dorsum towards the eye sockets, they become a little bit more softer. So this is also something we want to pay attention to. We really want to consider the structure of the nose and how skin rests over this structure, and what happens to the skin, how that kind of creates a subtle or a soft curvature in the skin formation around that bone structure, and then how it becomes a little bit more harsh as it gets to the cartilaginous protruding features such as the tip of the nose and the columella and those sort of features. Now just remember to take your time, slowly work shading along each side of the dorsum as it moves into the eye socket. Again, we want to build up our layers of pen work. Something important to note, obviously because of drawing a nose at an angle, is that the right side of the nose, or the side that is least exposed to a light source, is always going to be darker. And this is the case for how the shadowing kind of establishes the depth or protrusion of the entire nose structure. So it's important for us to keep in mind the tilt of the nose, and obviously which side is more exposed to light and which side is less exposed to light. Again, the right nostril is on our left side and the left nostril is on our right side. So we want to bear in mind that we kind of approaching this drawing in a mirrored approach, which means the features are flipped around. So with the right side, again, we want to make sure that as we add in some darkened shading to define the tip of the nose and the dorsum, we want to make sure that we work on the shading that is actually on the surface of the tip of the nose, that establishes the shape or the pointed area or protruding nature of the tip of the nose on the nose itself, but then the shading kind of on the skin area surrounding the dorsum or the ridge of the nose, which is kind of behind the nose. And this is the shadows that form into the eye socket and define the actual ridge of the nose or the structure of the dorsum. The same on the left side of the nose. However, this side is more exposed to us, so we can actually see the shadow formation along the dorsum or along the side of the dorsum is a lot more subtle, less harsh because of it being exposed to us, or a bit more visible than that of the right side. Again, the idea here is to really take your time slowly shading with your ballpoint pen. Another good suggestion is to keep some scrap paper nearby to kind of scribble on as you proceed with your ballpoint drawing process, and this way we can get rid of any excess buildup of ink in the pen before we add in shading to our nose drawing. Now we should basically have a generalized drawing of a nose at this point. Again, this tutorial kind of goes through the general concepts and ideas to think about as you approach a nose drawing, so you can always pause this drawing and continue your drawing, and then play this video as you work out your own nose drawing. So some major key points to think about with a nose drawing is, again, this structure is a bone structure with skin that forms over it. So it means there are moments of stretching skin, overlapping skin, creased skin, and what's happening is it's creating shadow formations around the nose that are defining the features, such as the columella, the tip of the nose, the dorsum, the alays, and so on and so on. And what we want to do is we want to work more with shading than distinct line work, because this is going to have a more realistic effect of how the nose is defined, or its features are defined by shadow formation rather than actual distinct lines. So yeah, a nose is really more a matter of exercising your shading process or your smooth shading abilities, because noses aren't ever really defined by really sharp line work. The only real line work that we should have present in our nose drawing are the lines that define the outline of the nose near the bottom features, and this is the areas such as the nostrils, the creases that define the alays that connect to the cheeks, or the inner cheek features, and that those creases or any sort of orifice or really stark or prominent indentations will have a little bit more distinct line work. The real challenge is creating those subtle gradient shifts within your shading that move from the alays to the dorsum, and define the areas of the nose that are really exposed to light, and the areas of the nose that have least or less exposure to light. Otherwise, that is it, guys. Something really important, again, to make sure that you do as you continue with your own nose drawing is take your time with pens. Use your pen as you would a pencil. Make sure that you build layers of shading rather than just making dark lines that you can't necessarily take back. Otherwise, that is it from my side. I hope this was helpful. If it was, please drop a like and a subscribe. That helps us a lot. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.